Ida for barely eating any of the cake my girlfriend made for my birthday and refusing to eat anything else she bakes until she apologizes. I've been with my current girlfriend for almost 3 years, and for the most part, we get along. We share common interests, similar tastes in movies, and even our sense of humor often aligns. But there is one topic that always drives a wedge between us: my mother. The conversations about her always turn into disagreements, small at first, but over time, they have built into something larger, something that looms over our relationship like a shadow that neither of us can ignore. My mother is different. There is no precise label for her condition because she was never formally diagnosed, but she has always been mentally slow. She grew up in a rough environment, deprived of the kind of structured care and education that might have helped her develop differently. She never had the guidance that would have taught her the social nuances that most people learn through experience. And because of that, she has always been a little out of step with the world around her. She had me when she was just 13. To say she was unprepared for motherhood would be an understatement. Physically, she was still a child. Emotionally, she was even younger. But despite her shortcomings, she was fun in a way that most mothers weren't. She wasn't the type to impose strict curfews or lecture me about responsibilities. She wasn't the mom who taught me how to manage money, how to plan for the future, or how to navigate adult life. But she was the kind of mom who made me laugh, who saw the world through the eyes of someone untouched by cynicism, and who, in her own way, loved me deeply. That love, however, was often chaotic. I had to grow up faster than most kids because my mother wasn't equipped to be the adult in the household. I learned early on how to manage finances, how to keep things in order, and how to make decisions that weren't hers to make. I resented it at times, but as I grew older, I understood that she had given me everything she could. It wasn't her fault that she lacked the tools to provide more. My girlfriend, however, sees her differently. From the beginning, she has struggled to be around my mother. She says she has no manners, that she can be rude, that she lacks the kind of social awareness that makes interactions comfortable. And the truth is, she's not wrong. My mother sometimes says things without thinking. She doesn't always pick up on social cues. She laughs at inappropriate moments, makes comments that can come off as blunt, and doesn't always grasp when a situation calls for subtlety. But none of it comes from a place of malice. It's just who she is. I've spent my entire life understanding that, accepting that, and adjusting my expectations accordingly. My girlfriend, on the other hand, doesn't see it that way. She sees someone who is an embarrassment, someone who disrupts the balance of our social life, someone who doesn't fit neatly into the world we have built together. The second major point of contention between us is my mother's living situation. I spend a significant amount of money ensuring that she has a place to live where she can be independent but still have help when she needs it. It's not cheap. The facility she lives in is expensive, but it gives her a chance at a better quality of life. It allows her to have a routine, to interact with people who are trained to help her, to live in a space that accommodates her needs. My girlfriend, however, sees it as an unnecessary expense. She believes that the money I spent on my mother could be better used elsewhere, specifically, toward our future. She dreams of buying a big house one day, of building a life that is free of financial constraints, and in her eyes, my mother's expenses are a roadblock to that dream. Our fights about money are frequent. One of the biggest sources of conflict is that I refuse to pay for my girlfriend's medical insurance. She has a plan, but it's one she can't afford comfortably, and she brings it up in nearly every argument. She doesn't understand why I am willing to spend thousands of dollars on my mother's living expenses but won't commit to something as fundamental as healthcare for the woman I claim to love. And I get why she's frustrated. But she's not my wife. I don't want to tie myself financially to something so significant when there's no legal or lifelong commitment in place. If things ever ended between us, what then? Would I still be expected to cover her expenses? And what if the costs increased over time? Would I be locked into a financial obligation that I no longer wanted? The fact that she doesn't understand my hesitation worries me. I have tried to explain it. I have tried to make it clear that while I love her, I have to be careful about the commitments I take on. But she doesn't see it that way. She sees it as proof that she isn't a priority. And maybe, in some ways, she's right. I won't lie, I love my girlfriend. I have tried to take our relationship to the next level. I have proposed twice, hoping to give her the kind of security she says she wants. Both times, she turned me down. I don't know what else I can do. I am willing to make a lifelong commitment to her, but she isn't willing to accept it. And yet, she still expects me to take on financial responsibilities that I am not comfortable with. It doesn't make sense to me. Despite all of this, we have managed to move forward. We have built a life together, balancing our differences as best as we can. But the tension is always there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the next disagreement to bring it back into focus. I don't know how much longer we can keep pushing it aside. I don't know if there's a resolution that will make both of us happy. All I know is that right now, we are standing on uneven ground, and every argument feels like another crack forming beneath us. I walked through the door, and suddenly the room exploded with noise. A chorus of voices shouted surprise. In unison, accompanied by the shrill blare of those party blowers. The air was thick with the scent of food, balloons were tied to every available surface, and the sight of so many people packed into our home made my stomach drop. I scanned the room, quickly identifying friends, co-workers, distant acquaintances, people I barely interacted with beyond a casual nod at the grocery store. And yet, there they were, smiling, clapping, cheering for me. Everyone except my mom. I felt the weight settle in my chest immediately, but I swallowed it down. This was supposed to be a happy occasion, and I wasn't going to ruin it by showing how much the absence of the one person I truly wanted to see affected me. My girlfriend's parents stood near the front, her mother beaming, her father giving me a firm nod of approval. I plastered a smile onto my face, the kind I had perfected over the years, the one that said, "Yes, this is great, I love this, thank you," even though my insides churned with irritation. I had been clear. No presents. No guests. Just a simple cake, the one I had every year. The one my mother would have made for me if she could. But here I was, trapped in a party I hadn't asked for, surrounded by well-meaning people who had no idea how exhausted I already was. I glanced toward my girlfriend, looking for some kind of explanation, but she was all smiles, caught up in the excitement, as if she had just pulled off the greatest surprise of all time. "Happy birthday, babe," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "I know you said you wanted something small, but come on, you deserve something big this year." I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? Thanks for ignoring what I actually wanted? Thanks for making this about what you thought was best, not what I asked for. I felt trapped, cornered by the expectation that I would be grateful, that I would put aside my personal feelings and embrace the moment. I told myself to play along, to not be the guy who sulked at his own birthday party. So I nodded, said the words that needed to be said, shook hands, accepted hugs, and let people slap me on the back like we were all old friends. Then I saw the cake. It wasn't the chocolate sheet cake with canned frosting and rainbow sprinkles. It was 3 elaborate, round lemon creme cakes, the kind of fancy, minimalist desserts that belonged in a high-end patisserie. They were beautiful, layered, decorated with precision, adorned with flowers and delicate berries. A work of art, no doubt. But it wasn't what I asked for. The disappointment hit me in waves. It wasn't just about the cake itself, it was what it represented. My girlfriend had heard me. She had listened when I told her what I wanted. And then she decided it wasn't good enough. That I wasn't good enough for something cheap and simple. That my traditions, my memories, the things that mattered to me, were secondary to her idea of what my birthday should look like. A hand on my shoulder brought me back to reality. A coworker, holding a drink, grinning. "Man, you've got it good," he said. "She went all out for you. Look at that cake." I forced a chuckle. "Yeah, it's really something." And it was. Just not for me. I made my way through the party in a fog, trying to ignore the ever-present knot of frustration sitting in my stomach. Gifts were handed to me despite my explicit request for none, and I felt guilty for not reacting the way people probably expected. I tried to smile, tried to express gratitude, but every moment that passed only made me feel more disconnected. Finally, it was time to cut the cake. My girlfriend handed me a plate with a massive slice, the rich layers standing tall, the lemon curd gleaming under the soft glow of the candles. I took a bite. It was good. It was objectively good. But I wasn't in the mood for it. "Too full from eating all of your favorite foods," I said absent-mindedly. The words came out sharper than I intended, and I saw her expression flicker just for a second before she recovered, setting her jaw and offering a tight smile. I knew I had hurt her, even if I hadn't meant to. But wasn't that what she had done to me? She had dismissed the one thing I had wanted, ignored my wishes, taken something personal and transformed it into something unrecognizable. The party dragged on, and then, just as the guests were finishing their cake, the front door creaked open. I turned, and there she was, my mother. She stood there, small and hesitant, her hands carefully holding a single cupcake. My heart clenched. I was across the room in an instant. "I hope I'm not too late," she said, her voice as bright as ever. "Of course not," I said, reaching for the cupcake. It was exactly what I wanted, just like every year. My girlfriend stood nearby, watching. Her expression was unreadable, but I could feel the tension. And then, before I could say anything, before I could stop her, she made a joke. Something about how the cupcake was unique, just like my mom. Laughter rippled through the room. I felt my stomach drop. I turned to my mother, searching her face for any sign that she had caught the insult, but as always, she remained blissfully unaware. She just smiled, happy to be there, happy to give me my little tradition, happy in a way that made my chest ache. I couldn't let it go. Not this time. The party ended, but the anger remained, boiling beneath the surface. I sat in bed that night, eating my cupcake, letting the quiet wrap around me like a blanket, hoping that I could salvage some small part of my birthday for myself. Then she spoke. "Of course you'd rather eat something that looks like it was made by a toddler than actual quality." The last straw. The argument that followed was heated, raw, filled with words we could never take back. I couldn't understand how someone who claimed to love me could be so dismissive, so cruel toward my mother. And she couldn't understand why I wasn't grateful for everything she had done. I ended up sleeping on the couch. The next morning, I made my stance clear. Until she apologized, I wouldn't eat a single one of her desserts. 3 days passed. 3 days of tension, of whispered conversations behind my back, of her family calling me ungrateful. The party, the insurance, my relationship with my mother, everything was now on display, dissected by people who had no idea what my life had been like. And I was left wondering, was this really love? Or was I holding on to something that had already started to crumble? The weight of the evening pressed down on me as I forced myself to endure the celebration, my face fixed in a polite smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. The room was filled with the sounds of laughter, conversations overlapping, the occasional burst of music someone had turned on in the background. My girlfriend flitted between guests, basking in the warmth of their praise, their admiration for the effort she had put into making this a perfect evening. Every so often, she would glance at me, searching for the reaction she expected, for the gratitude I knew she wanted to see. And I tried. I really did. But the lump in my throat only grew heavier with every passing moment. The cake sat before me, its delicate layers of lemon and cream standing in stark contrast to the messy, comforting sheet cake I had imagined. It was flawless, almost too perfect, like something out of a magazine spread, artful, refined, completely impersonal. I could see the meticulous effort she had put into making it. It must have taken hours. Maybe even days. And yet, looking at it, all I felt was disappointment. I wanted the cake I had eaten every year since I was a child. The one my mother used to make for me with her own hands, even when we had nothing. The one that came from love, not from the desire to impress. But my girlfriend hadn't understood that. Or maybe she had and chose to ignore it, thinking she knew better. People were watching. Expecting something. I swallowed hard, reached for the knife, and cut into the cake. The texture was soft, the cream delicate, the flavors undoubtedly balanced. But as I lifted a bite to my mouth, it tasted like obligation. Like someone else's idea of what I should want. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to swallow. Good, right? My girlfriend asked, her voice tinged with anticipation. I nodded stiffly. Yet. It's nice. She beamed, satisfied with the bare minimum of enthusiasm I could muster. But my stomach churned with the effort of keeping my emotions in check. As I pushed the plate aside, barely touching the slice I had been given, my girlfriend's expression shifted. I caught the flicker of disappointment in her eyes, the way her mouth tensed at the corners. I knew what she was thinking. He's ungrateful. He doesn't appreciate the work I put into this. But I didn't have the energy to explain, to justify my feelings. So I lied. I'm just too full, I said, offering a weak smile. Ate too much earlier. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharpening. Too much of my favorite foods. I could tell she was daring me to say it out loud, to confirm what we both knew, that everything about this party, from the food to the guests to the cake, had been what she wanted. Not me. And maybe I should have softened my words, but frustration burned through me, fraying the last of my patience. Yet, I said, too blunt, too tired to care. Her face hardened, the brief crack in her composure smoothing over into something unreadable. She turned away without another word, throwing herself back into the party, but I could feel the shift between us, the tension that settled into place like a weight pressing against my ribs. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I opened gifts with the same forced smile, murmured thanks, tried to match the excitement people expected. But the truth was, I didn't want any of it. I didn't want the presents, the crowd, the spectacle. All I had wanted was something simple, something small, something that meant something to me. And then, just when I thought I had made it through the worst of it, my mother arrived. She walked in hesitantly, her small frame barely making a ripple in the noisy room. Her hands were cupped around a single cupcake, carefully balanced as if it were the most precious thing in the world. And to me, it was. My chest tightened. I hope I'm not too late, she said, her voice light, full of warmth. I moved toward her immediately, relief washing over me. Never, I said, taking the cupcake from her hands. It was simple, the frosting a little uneven, the sprinkles scattered haphazardly, but it was mine. It was what I had been waiting for all day. For a moment, I felt a flicker of peace. But then, my girlfriend's voice cut through the air, laced with something sharp beneath the surface. Well, she said, forcing a laugh, that's unique. The words hung there, heavy and barbed. A few people chuckled, a reflexive kind of laughter, the kind that comes when you don't fully understand the joke but feel the pressure to react anyway. I froze. The cupcake suddenly felt fragile in my hands, as if it would crumble under the weight of my anger. My mother, thankfully oblivious, just smiled, taking a seat at the edge of the room, perfectly content in her own world. But I wasn't. I clenched my jaw, the party noise fading into the background. I wanted to say something, to call my girlfriend out on the cruelty of her words, but I knew that if I did, it would explode into something bigger, something messy. So I swallowed the bitterness down, pretending I hadn't heard, pretending it didn't matter. But it did. The final blow came later that night, when the guests had left, the house had quieted, and I had retreated to the bedroom, my cupcake in hand. I sat on the bed, peeling back the wrapper, hoping that maybe this small moment could salvage something, could make the day feel a little less hollow. Then she spoke. Of course you'd rather eat something that looks like it was made by a toddler than actual quality. The words were muttered under her breath, barely more than a whisper, but they sliced through me like a blade. I stared at her, the last thread of patience snapping. Are you serious? Her eyes met mine, a flicker of something defiant in them. I'm just saying. No, I cut her off, my voice tight. I don't want to hear it. The argument that followed was inevitable. It was a storm that had been building for months, maybe years, and now it finally broke. Words were thrown carelessly, accusations laced with old wounds and resentments. You're so ungrateful, she spat. I did all of this for you. And you couldn't even pretend to appreciate it. I never wanted any of this, I shot back. You did this for yourself. Oh, right, she scoffed. Because God forbid I try to make your birthday special instead of letting you cling to some childhood nostalgia. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. You don't get it. You never got it. She glared at me, arms crossed, waiting for me to say something, to apologize, to fix what had broken between us. But I had nothing left to give. So I walked out. I slept on the couch that night, my anger simmering in the dark silence of the living room. The next morning, I made it clear until she apologized, I wasn't touching any of her desserts. 3 days passed. No apology. Instead, she told everyone that I had hated the party, that I had been selfish, ungrateful. Her family found out about the insurance thing, and now the judgment came from all sides. And through it all, I found myself asking the same question over and over. Was this love? Or had I just been ignoring the cracks all along? The silence between us had thickened like a fog, suffocating, stretching across every interaction. 3 days had passed, each one feeling heavier than the last. The house, once filled with casual conversations and shared moments, had become a battlefield of unspoken words and lingering resentment. Every glance, every movement carried an unacknowledged weight. I could feel her frustration, the way she slammed cabinet doors just a little harder, the way she lingered near me, waiting for me to crack first. But I wouldn't. Not this time. She had crossed a line. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to understand how much it had hurt me. I had tried to let it go. I had told myself that it wasn't worth the fight, that I should just brush it aside like I had so many times before. But that comment, the one about my mom, the one she had tossed out so casually, so thoughtlessly, had lodged itself deep in my chest. It wasn't just an insult. It wasn't just a joke that went too far. It was a reflection of something bigger, something uglier. A sign that she didn't respect my mother. That she didn't respect me. And maybe, if I was being honest with myself, she never really had. She thought she was doing me a favor. She thought that by throwing the party, by making the cake, by controlling every detail, she was somehow improving my life, making it better than what she saw as my sad traditions. She never once stopped to ask herself why those traditions mattered to me in the first place. She never thought about what that cake meant. What my mother's presence meant. What it meant to see the one person who had been there for me my whole life show up at my door, carefully cradling a single cupcake like it was the most precious thing in the world. But I had seen it. I had felt it. And that moment, seeing my mom walk in, bringing me my tradition in the only way she could, had been the best part of my entire birthday. And my girlfriend had ruined it. Not just by excluding my mom, not just by mocking her, but by making sure everyone else laughed, too. By turning my mother into a joke. And that was something I couldn't forgive. The tension in the house built with each passing day, with each pointed silence, with each moment where she waited for me to cave. But I wouldn't. I refused. And then, on the fourth day, she broke. She came home from work, dropping her bag on the counter with an audible thud. I barely looked up from where I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone. I could feel her eyes on me, could sense the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "You're really going to keep this up?" she asked finally, her voice sharp. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to choose my words carefully. I wanted to make sure she understood. "I told you," I said slowly, without looking at her, "I'm not eating anything you bake until you apologize." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "For what, exactly?" I set my phone down. Looked at her. "For the way you treated my mom." She threw her hands up. "Oh my God, I didn't treat her anyway. I made a joke." "You embarrassed her," I said flatly. "You embarrassed me." "Oh please," she scoffed, crossing her arms. She didn't even notice. "That doesn't make it okay." She rolled her eyes. "You are seriously being dramatic about this." "No," I said, my voice steady, "I'm not." She let out a long, frustrated sigh. "You're acting like I did something evil. Like I deliberately set out to ruin your birthday." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because, in a way, she had. She stared at me, waiting for me to back down, waiting for me to tell her it was fine, that I was overreacting. But I wasn't. For the first time in our relationship, I wasn't backing down. She shook her head, her expression hardening. "You know what?" she said, her voice clipped. "Fine. If you want an apology so badly, I'm sorry. There. You happy now?" I felt nothing. No sincerity. No understanding. Just impatience. Just annoyance that I hadn't let it slide. I sighed, standing up. "That's not an apology. That's you trying to get me to shut up about it." She scoffed. "Jesus Christ, I don't know what else you want from me." I looked at her, really looked at her. And I realized something. I didn't want anything from her anymore. This wasn't just about the party. Or the cake. Or the joke. This was about the fact that, after 3 years, she still didn't get me. She didn't respect the things that mattered to me. She didn't respect my mother. And that wasn't something I could ignore anymore. I let out a breath, rubbing a hand over my face. "I think we need to take a break." She froze. "What?" "This isn't working," I said simply. "We don't want the same things. We don't respect the same things." Her face twisted. "So you're breaking up with me because I threw you a party?" I shook my head. "No. I'm breaking up with you because you don't listen to me. Because you don't respect what's important to me. Because you made fun of my mother, and you don't even care." Her jaw tightened. For a second, I thought she was going to fight, going to argue, going to try. But then something in her eyes changed. She let out a breath. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "If that's what you want." I nodded. "It is." She grabbed her bag, her movements stiff, mechanical. "I'll stay at my parents' for a while." I didn't try to stop her. And just like that, it was over. The house was quieter after she left. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I called my mom that night. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright as always. "How's my birthday boy?" she asked. I smiled. "Better." She hummed knowingly. "I was worried about you." "I know," I said. "But I'm okay." There was a pause. "You know, sweetheart," she said gently, "you deserve someone who likes the things you love. Not someone who wants to change them." I swallowed. "Yeah," I said, my throat tight. "I think you're right." I could hear the smile in her voice. "I usually am." I laughed. A real laugh. And for the first time in days, I felt light.